Okay, I think we're live, we're on. Can everybody who's there hear me and see me okay? Terrific. You can hear and see me. Great. Let's hope the connection stays good for this morning, at least this morning here in Australia. Lovely to see people from all over the world, southern, northern hemisphere, the north, the south, the east, the west. Great to see you all. Well, it's a lovely autumn morning here. Very pleasant temperatures at the moment, and our clocks have turned back an hour. We've lost our daylight summer savings time, summertime, which means for those of you in Europe, you may have gone forward an hour, which means it's so much later for you there when we're doing this live stream. So we're going to adjust the timing a little bit, which may help in a few weeks' time. We'll let you know. Jayasara will let you know next time. Great. Someone from Wollongong, which isn't too far from here. Got people from everywhere, all over the United States and Europe. Fantastic. Well, this morning we have an opportunity in what we call live time, connecting all over the globe in more or less the same time, which is an amazing phenomenon. We take it so for granted, this kind of internet phenomenon, being able to connect live within a couple of seconds anyway. But it really is amazing technology and opens our mind to the possibility of time and space being a little bit beyond our narrow concept of just clock time and physical distance. So we've come together to do a guided meditation, and we can discuss any of your questions after the meditation, an opportunity to contemplate the Dhamma. And obviously I'm a Buddhist nun, I come from the Buddhist perspective, but it's really more and more a kind of a universal perspective when we look at the teachings of the masters from all traditions, their teachings and wise pointings are all pointing us back to the very same reality that we all share. So this is becoming more and more obvious if you're familiar with Samaneri Jayasara's recordings on the Wisdom of the Masters channel. You would know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's settle now for the guided meditation. And wherever you find yourself now, just begin by being aware of the space of the room that you're in. So feeling the body, feeling the physicality of the body, but with eyes open for a few moments, just really become aware of the space of the room that you're in, that you're inhabiting. Often when we become aware of the space we're in, we become aware of the objects in the room, like the couch or the bed or the furniture or the lights, the windows, etc. But perhaps just look at the space between the objects. Actually become aware of the space within which these objects reside or appear. The space within the room you are right now. And recognize that the space within the room is actually no different than the space outside of the room. It's only that it's artificially separated by walls and windows, roofs, floors. But actually the space inside your house, your room, or wherever you are, exactly the same connected space to outside. And that outside space, or the inside, which is the same thing, that's connected to all space everywhere. There's no end, perceivable end to that space. So I'm just encouraging you to bring this in, this perception into awareness. That space as an element of existence, something we can perceive, is boundless, without perceivable boundary, without limitation. And internally it's the same. Within this body, the spaces within the body, the air that we're breathing in and breathing out is intermixing with the elements of that space. So there's this constant interaction between so-called internal and external. So this space element, the air element, it's something that we're breathing in, breathing out. Inside, outside, through this particular perception is only artificially separated. It's really the same stuff. Say artificially separated, that's probably not the right word. Let's say conventionally separated as a perception. But actually this skin of the body is an organ that also exchanges moisture, air, earth element with the external environment and the internal environment. So that's not a completely solid boundary either. So just bringing to mind this perception of interconnectivity with all the elements. This body survives and relies on this moment by moment interaction, interconnection, and exchange, as do all beings, all plant life, all animal life, is actually in a constant respiration or interaction with the what we call the external environment. Internal, external, just like the space inside the room and the space outside the room. We think they're different, but when we really inquire, they're not. There's permeability, there's interactivity, interconnection, exchange and mutual dependency. So as we close our eyes and come more fully into awareness of this experience of body and breath, we can see that and experience that exchange through the experience of this body breathing, the experience of respiration. The body breathes in and out. From the moment it was born, it automatically started breathing in and out. And this process will continue to the moment we die, to the last out breath, with no more in breath, to the moment this body dies. This respiration is the one of the main supports for the existence of this body. Breathing in, breathing out. So just take a few moments in silence to contemplate and be aware of this in and out breath. Just observing it with awareness as it naturally is. And sometimes the breath appears short and shallow, and sometimes it goes deeper, a longer in-breath and out-breath, particularly as the body starts to relax and mind starts to relax. Just observing that as it is. When we give attention to the body and breath, we're simplifying the field of attention. Which we might otherwise be running with various threads of thoughts and notions, ideas. But giving our attention to the body and the breath slows things down on the mental level. We're observing reality in terms of body and breath, which is only happening in this moment. It can't be imagined. It's not a memory. We're just observing the breath, the sensations of the in and out breath as they're happening. Being with this moment of breathing as it flows to another and another. So no force involved. There will still be thoughts that run through the mind. And at times your attention will be hijacked by those thoughts or memories. So the practice is merely simply to remember the breath sensations in this moment. Remember to be aware of the in-breath and the out-breath, just as they are. And then the thoughts just disperse, disappear as we remember the breath. I say remember, it's another word for being mindful, being aware of this experience here and now. Just shifting our attention to the physical. And we notice as we do that, usually the breath is a calming experience, just like the gentle tide of the water lapping onto the shore and drawing back. As we observe it, it usually, if we observe it without tension, just with open awareness, usually it allows the body to relax. We have a feeling of ease arising. And then the breath can be more relaxed and open and deep. The body and mind start to let go of any tension or stress all by itself. And as we appreciate that experience of ease, as we notice that, it's like an invitation to rest more into that, to allow your whole body, your whole mind to be soothed and bathed in this feeling of ease, even if it's just a small sense of ease at this point. To allowing yourself to rest into that ease and relaxation and continue being aware of the movement of the breath, even as it becomes more gentle or subtle. And as thoughts continue to move through the mind, we gently just let them pass through like a bird flying through the sky. We have peripheral awareness of it, but we don't. The intention is not to run with it, to go after it, but to relax into this ease of simplicity of breathing, being, just here and now, with things as they are. And sounds will come and go. Perceptions in the mind, images, memories, thoughts may also come and go. We don't want to struggle with them. We just allow them to be as they are. If we open into the spaciousness of here and now, let the mind be an open spacious awareness. Then the various sense perceptions can come and go without struggle, without interference. Sounds, sensations, flashes of thought, memory. In essence, they appear and disappear. And we can be aware of that. No struggle, don't have to hold them out of awareness. And similarly, we don't have to follow them, we don't have to analyze them, claim them, fight them, try to get rid of them. If awareness becomes fully poised and fully present, which essentially it is anyway, then these sense experiences just show their own nature. They arise and cease, they come, they go. It's like the various objects in space, kind of floating around, coming into awareness, disappearing again. We don't have to grab them, identify with them. Our perspective is just to know them as they are, without grasping, without pushing and pulling, and to rest into that very field of awareness, spacious awareness. And we use the perception of the in and out breath becomes a kind of an anchor for us to stay connected to present moment, rather than drifting with waves of thinking or daydreaming. To know the breath in this moment is to be fully present. The essential practice is to just be aware of what is present here and now. And while the breath is the the sensations of the breath is a tool for helping us stay connected. Sometimes, depending on circumstances, the mind can feel a little overwhelmed with a rush of mental energy, thinking, or strong emotion. So don't see this as an obstacle so much, but just be aware of that as the present moment experience. So whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, just know this is present. There is this feeling of anxiety or sadness or grief, whatever may be present right now. Just know it for what it is and see if you can breathe with it just as it is in this moment. Similarly, with a lot of mental thoughts all strung together, see if you can see that as just mental energy, like a rush, like a strong current in the ocean. You feel this, perhaps a strong current of thinking. Just know it as that, the feeling of a strong mental current. And can you breathe with that sensation, that mental sensation, just as it is in this moment? It's just mental energy. Strong current, slow current, no current. However it is, to know it as just mental energy. It changes. But we can breathe with it and get perspective on that. Breathing in and out with that. And see what happens. So we're not trying to fix experience or hold experience in any particular pattern. We're not particularly wanting to focus the mind tightly on one experience. We actually want to open the mind to discover its own natural, open awareness which is already still, which is already present, is already unhindered. To discover that basis of reality or experience. Because our minds are somewhat conditioned to chase particular experiences, the good ones, the pleasant ones, or to get rid of the unpleasant experiences, or to chase ideas of how we think, or in meditation to try and create a space of peace or awareness. But that's just chasing down ideas. We'll never find the end of that kind of movement of mind. But as we learn to open the mind and to relax the seeking, the searching, the chasing, the pushing, the pulling, and to recognize, as we did at the beginning of this meditation, that the space wherein everything exists is everywhere. So it is with awareness. It's already present. It's already boundless. It's already fully awake. We just have to relax our attention, let go of its habitual movements of seeking, and to allow the various appearances of sense activity to appear and disappear, sounds, sensations, mental images, thoughts, to release the habitual tendency to chase thoughts, to chase images, to proliferate. When that keeps happening, we just keep releasing and opening. Or another way of saying that is just resting in awareness here and now. Releasing our fixated awareness, our fixated attention. Which is kind of fueled by the idea that I have to get something else or seek some other experience. But simply relaxing that allows the mind to discover its own nature, which is this open, spacious, boundless awareness, ever present, already awake. Inherently knowing, aware. We learn to recognize that, trust that, and abide therein. So as we bring this meditation to a close, perhaps without the idea of ending the meditation, just allow the eyes to gradually open and take in the visuals of the space around you, still with that sense of open awareness, abiding in open awareness. And while the visual world is, our visual perceptions can sometimes, well, it is conditioned. Our mind is conditioned to perceive ourselves as separate from everything else because of the visual sense of this body as separate from other objects in the visual sphere. But recognize that this is just visual perception. It doesn't have to stay as concrete as it appears. And this perceiving of awareness as unbounded, as the field wherein all sense objects appear and disappear. Recognizing that as the basis of your mind, your true nature. This body is also a perception that appears and disappears within that. Whether the perception of sensation, physical sensations arising and ceasing, or visual sensations, visual perceptions with eyes open. When you close your eyes, that visual perception is no longer present. But when eyes are open, it's a strong conditioner for a sense of separateness. But it is just that, it's momentary perception. So bringing this meditation to a close now. Thank you all for staying with it in your respective spaces. And we have an opportunity now for questions and Dharma discussion. So please feel free to pop your questions into the chat box and we'll see where this discussion goes. Any questions about the meditation or Dharma in general, you're most welcome. Take a little bit of water. So I'm glad people enjoyed that meditation. You might have heard some little cat noises through that meditation. She decided to eat some breakfast at the beginning, and you might have even seen a tail as she walked behind me around to another sleeping place. So Cattie's still alive and well and going strong. She loves sleeping in the sun in the morning by the window. She mostly sleeps and eats. She's 21 years old, but she's a lovely companion. We love cat noises anytime. Good. So are there any questions coming up for people? Please remember that these meditations are archived under the live tab on the YouTube channel, so you can go back to them anytime. I think it's even possible to download, for those who have the various means, to download them and put them onto a recorder, MP3 player or something. So, so what is meant by abiding in open awareness? So I mentioned that a couple of times in the meditation. You know, words are very, we use words to approximate what we mean, or if we're pointing to something in experience. So people can use various words to help point people to recognize something in their experience, or to relax and open any kind of habitual tension or seeking within experience. So when I say abiding in open awareness, I'm encouraging you to allow the mind or the seeking energy just to rest in that experience of open awareness. The awareness is the nature of the mind. Well, you know, you can always recognize awareness at any particular point. Very simply, if I say, are you aware right now? If you're not asleep, you would have to acknowledge you are aware. And what is that awareness? It's this basic experience of knowing, or what we call awareness or knowing. It's an open receptivity which has this quality of awareness or knowing. So learning to abide in that nature of mind is the essential pointing of, I would say, most spiritual traditions. Learning to recognize that, first of all, within our experience, and learning to abide there is simply the encouragement to rest the mind there. Because our usual experience is, as I mentioned, we're running after thoughts, and it becomes this associated thinking or mental proliferation, and we find we can think of 10 things in 2 seconds, and I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and get rid of this, and go here and do that. It's this modern world of ours, we're receiving so much information, and it's prompting habitual responses. And however we perceive and conceive of our life and our activity, we've got a lot of things on the go. So when it comes to meditation, we're practicing to let go of those habitual fixations and chasing after thoughts, or fixating on particular memories that arise in awareness, or fixating on any particular sense experience that arises in awareness, but just simply recognizing they come, they go. So we're not trying to block them out or get rid of them or push them away. The nature of sense experience is momentary, it comes and goes, and as we recognize that, we start to perceive and recognize the space of awareness within which these seem to appear and disappear. It's not just one constant sense experience. We start to recognize the space of awareness itself, and that fixation settles down, or the perceived experience of various sensations settles down. So the experience of spaciousness and awareness comes more to the fore. So we learn just to keep resting that seeking energy, wants to go out, seemingly grab onto some experience, create some experience, identify with some experience rather than just rest in this open awareness that knows. That's what I'm pointing to. But that's what I was saying in the meditation, that reality is always there. We don't have to create it. And if we try to push away all the activity within the mind, we actually create more activity from that resistance or pushing, or this trying to create something different, trying to create peace by pushing things away. It doesn't come that way. It comes from learning just to open the mind and rest and recognize that things come and go by themselves. And then you start to perceive the spaciousness more and more. That becomes more obvious. So someone asks, am I to hold awareness as separate from ego consciousness that holds all is all? It's hard to know exactly what you're asking, or anyone is asking in a very brief question. So keep in mind that my responses will be approximate. So what I take from this question is, am I to hold awareness as separate from ego consciousness that holds all is all? I wouldn't say to try and hold awareness, but to recognize that beyond any attempt to hold anything or keep anything, awareness is a natural state. You actually can't get rid of it if you wanted to. It's so recognizing is the main thing, rather than holding or fixating or hanging on to, is to recognize. So then this idea of ego consciousness is really a thought that comes and goes. The I thought, or the I am this thought, or I want this, or I don't want that. These kind of impulses or thoughts come and go. So we're not even trying to get rid of that. We just want to see it in perspective, see it for what it is. It's an impermanent, conditioned phenomena appearing as a mental thought or image or impulse. We just want to see it as that. And the seeing of it is enough. That creates that is the perspective, the natural perspective. And what sees it is awareness. Awareness knows it, awareness sees it. Now that awareness, we can get more refined with this kind of analysis. It may be helpful for some and not helpful for others, but I'll continue. That awareness is not separate from ego consciousness, essentially. It might initially appear to be so, but ego consciousness is just like a modification of that awareness. It's something that arises within that field and disperses. Just the metaphor is just like clouds kind of appear out of nowhere in the sky. Certain things, elements gather together, and then we have this appearance of a cloud, and then it equally disperses and goes nowhere but back into the space of what we call the sky. So that's an approximate metaphor for this appearance of thoughts. What we might call ego consciousness is simply the I thought, a thought that we feel wholly identified with, or even partly identified with. It feels really like me and mine, what I am. It has certain impulse with it. But it's simply just like any other thought or sense impression. It actually appears and disappears. We sometimes don't see the disappearance because we've invested our attention into it, and so a certain process perpetuates of thinking and rethinking and creating ideas for the future or rehashing the past, and we think this is all have this flavor of me and mine, but ego consciousness has the flavor of restriction and essential unsatisfactoriness and essential separateness. If the mind, through not fully understanding this construction, mental construction, is identified there. So seeing its ephemeralness, its changeability, that it comes and goes, is getting what we call right perspective. And within that, you recognize the spaciousness of awareness. The more we recognize the spaciousness of awareness, the more the ephemerality of appearances becomes obvious. Yeah, so I hope that helps to clarify your question. So someone says, Christine says, I found it very useful to connect with the space in the room and beyond, which helped to connect or become mindful with the fastness of awareness itself. I think you mean the vastness of awareness itself, I think. The F and the V's quite close on the keyboard, but I think that's what you mean, the vastness. Yes, that's exactly right, and that's why I like to encourage people to connect, to look at the space in their physical environment. This is something we can do anywhere, anytime, except when you're driving. I would say stay aware of the objects in your field of vision. And this also helps, we're not trying to get the mind into some other state through meditation, because that cutting off from this experience to go into some other realm, where actually this is whether we're awake and engaged in activity, eyes open, or sitting meditation, it's the same field of experience, the same elements: earth, water, fire, air, space, consciousness. So to recognize the kind of continuity and interactivity of that, it helps us to see that meditation is not something other than our very nature of being, even as we perform all our duties in life. So thank you for that comment. How do I know the difference between intuition and overthinking? Well, intuition would never overthink. Intuition, in my experience, I must say that intuition is a word that doesn't have a very clear definition. People will use it in different ways, referring to different kinds of experiences. I take intuition to be, etymologically, intuition is a kind of something, a teaching, a learning that arises spontaneously from within. So it's not actually about thinking, and particularly not overthinking, which is much more of a conditioned process. Overthinking in particular often just is arising from anxiety or nervousness or doubt. These mind states will instigate a lot of overthinking, or the habit of ruminating, So intuition, in my experience, it can be hard to discern, let's say, the difference between intuition and a conditioned thought. A conditioned thought being a habitual perception, thinking. But intuition, in my experience in the past, has been something that arises in a flash, and it's not necessarily an obvious thing. It's almost subliminal in the stream of consciousness. And people can learn to recognize it over time. Like sometimes you recognize it, how how to say, kind of further down the track. So I had an intuition about that. I had a thought that that might happen, but I didn't take it seriously. I didn't really make a thing of it at the time. You only recognize it in hindsight. And so in my experience, I've seen the intuition is a flash. It's not a conditioned thought. It doesn't arise out of any particular emotional state or mind state. It might just flash up momentarily and often subliminally. And sometimes people can become more sensitive to this and then bring it into consciousness more and make a note of that. And for some people, it can inform their choices. Often we're presented with situations where we have to choose, should we do this or that? And it can be mundane or a bit more important in our life in terms of the changes we might be wanting to make. So what I've, over the years of my experience, what I've come to say to myself is sleep on it. Because if I don't know what's the right choice to make in a particular situation, if I've got the luxury of a bit of time to sleep on it, even just for one night or sometimes a couple of nights. Often in the mornings, I'll wake up, or after a few days, it's just kind of sorted itself out. The mind just seems to think, yeah, this is the way to go. A lot can get sorted out in our sleep state. A lot can settle just spontaneously over time, and you get a stronger sense of what feels like the right way to go. And it hasn't been a rational process of thinking it through. For me, I find sometimes thinking things through is very helpful, because sometimes we're often thinking in a very tunnel-like vision, and we've forgotten to include tunnel-like logic, one stream of logic. We've forgotten to recognize that, but we didn't consider this. We have to actually consider this situation, and then that information then informs the overall decision. So sometimes just giving that thinking is helpful, but then sometimes giving thinking a rest and letting it go and waiting for a couple of days, something else comes through. So Leo says, I wish you could talk a little about responsiveness as opposed to thinking. I think. To thinking, I think. Okay, I get what you mean. A little more about responsiveness as opposed to thinking, I think, as per Longchenpa's natural meditative stability. Yeah, so responsiveness, when thoughts arise, they are just conditioned processes in one view. There are causes, meaning there are causes in the mix of things that give rise to them. It's not necessarily that this I we perceive as an ego consciousness is giving rise to them in this moment. So that's an important point. It's not me just stimulating the thinking here and now. It's often just when we get fixated on something, we can feel if there's strong, not even strong, if there's a sense of desire in the heart, in the mind, it is fuel for thinking. So if we have a particular outcome in mind, that desire is fuel for thinking along particular tracks, for example. And the way, in my understanding, at least the way Longchenpa talks about responsiveness of the mind, it's naturally responsive in that. And keep in mind that Longchenpa, when he talks about responsiveness, he's talking about responsiveness from the perspective of true nature, of the nature of mind, when the mind is known and is resting in its own natural openness and sensitivity. Just like sounds, sensations, thoughts as sense experiences, memories, can arise and cease. So he's saying that responsiveness is it's just the mind in a responsive mode to sense impressions, whether it's physically, through any of the six senses, and the mental mind, mano, being the sixth sense base, will give rise to perceptions, thoughts. So it's not necessarily that I, in the ego sense, is doing it. Right? So that's what responsiveness means, is actually the mind is naturally responsive, even when there's no grasping, no identification. Thoughts, discursive thoughts, may still arise. The difference is the mind recognizing this state of responsiveness is that resting in this open awareness, or recognizing this open awareness, rather than being fixated on a stream, attention being conditioned and fixated and traveling through the power of desire or aversion or ignorance, this responsiveness is like just the natural appearance of things here and now without the ego I involvement. So this has a true perspective. When one knows this responsiveness, it is what we call the view. So we're not about trying to shut down this responsiveness, because that responsiveness is the nature of mind. And in that open awareness, responsiveness, often we talk about the open heart or the open mind. This is where wisdom and compassion are the natural responses of the heart that's open, of the mind that's open, and not fixated in ego identity. So words are very difficult, aren't they? But that's all we have if we're going to point to experiences and discern what's going on. So you'll notice that the words that are used in different spiritual traditions are different. So they become like memes within a tradition. Once you understand what they're pointing to, it becomes possible to use that language to help in your own journey, in your own awakening, as well as to communicate to others. But, from the Christian perspective to the Tibetan perspective, from the Theravada perspective to the Sufi perspective, we have wholly different kinds of words and language that points to this same terrain of experience. So the words can appear different. And even within the same tradition, teachers may use same words but trying to point to something slightly different, or they can use different words trying to point to the same thing. So we have to recognize that words are merely pointers and they can only ever be approximate. But so we get to know what they're pointing to, and if that's helpful, then we cultivate that path and use those pointers. So someone says, Ayya, are you aware of the differences in the surrounding atmospheres that appear, especially in the outside perception of space, the emotional flavors that appear from the outside world? Aware of the differences in the surrounding atmospheres that appear in outside perception of space. So we've got differences in atmosphere and then emotional flavors that appear in the outside world. I don't know exactly what you're asking, Jenny. I can I can, I might be able to take a guess, but I'm going to ask you maybe if you can give me a few more words to help me understand what you're asking. Certainly there's different, in the so-called outside world, there are different atmospheres, like in a sense that you can go to different places and get different feelings associated with that place. Some places may appear as kind of like, heavenly, beautiful environments, and other places can appear like there's a lot of heaviness there. I think that maybe what you're referring to, particularly in terms of emotional flavors from the outside world. But there's also, these emotions actually are also obviously something we perceive through our own minds. So it may be that when we perceive these different experiences in different places, we're resonating with something within that field. It's resonating, say, with something within our own hearts and minds. And depending on our own experience, it may bring up memories or flavors of the past in that sense. So how much is internal, how much is external? This is very hard to discern. And even if there is the internal, external, is it a pure objective perception that this place is a happy, peaceful place, and that place is a sad, heavy place? Or how much is the mind, in terms of our individual conditioned experience, resonating with something within that field? So I'll just offer that for the moment. To what does the Buddha refer when he says, "I have seen the house builder"? So that's a good question. The house builder. The movement of the mind, the underlying tendency of the mind to create a sense of me and mine, this sense of restriction, this sense of separateness, individuality, and that goes, in the Buddhist scriptures, that goes from one life to the next, is constantly creating a new birth, a new environment for itself to exist in. So the house builder is, we're looking at that, particularly the becoming energy, which is dependent on craving and clinging, ignorance, craving and clinging. So ignorance is the root cause of let's say, what's the root cause of dukkha, of suffering, of unsatisfactoriness in the Buddhist paradigm. But it's ignorance of the true nature of reality. Once the true nature of reality is understood, then the mind no longer gives rise to that sense of suffering or entrapment. So the house builder is like being entrapped in a house, in walls, metaphorically, just being embodied in the sense of rebirth after rebirth, not knowing the way out, but only experiencing this sense of entrapment and restriction and separateness, and undergoing these experiences of aging, illness, death, with the sense that this is who I am, this is me and mine, and the various anxieties and fears that go along with that. But once the mind awakens to true nature, really comprehends that with wisdom, with understanding, then it knows that, it sees beyond this ego consciousness that identifies with body as me and mine, and even with this mental stream of thinking as me and mine, or even sense consciousness as me and mine. It sees beyond that to this unbounded sphere of awareness itself, which is not personal. With that full recognition, that full understanding, this sense of attachment and the craving that comes with it, me trying to get somewhere or get away from something, just drops away. Sometimes gradually, eventually completely. And there's, when he says that, I've seen the house builder, that very, with ignorance being completely dispersed, with wisdom and understanding awakening there. There's no more identification with those movements of desire, aversion, the wanting, the not wanting. They may appear, but mind doesn't grasp them. There's no grasping. That drops out. Without grasping, there's no becoming. There's no traveling with it. There's no continued conceptual constructs being created which become the house. So the house builder, as far as my understanding goes, is this attachment, this clinging, and this becoming energy. You know, taking that limited reality and trying to make it into something else, and it's constantly moving forward. So when he says, I've seen the house builder, that's really ignorance, craving, clinging, or ignorance, attachment, clinging, becoming. And it can no longer function. So there's just this experience of open, spacious awareness, no suffering. There's still awareness of this body and this mind as conditioned phenomena, but no longer identification with it. The heart is free, the mind is free, even with the remaining conditions of this body and mind. So I find it fascinating how much the group dynamic can seem to deepen my meditation experience. I guess it's just love, right? But if there ultimately aren't really any individuals, am I just imagining? Well, in my experience, I think there is something about coming together for meditation. In my experience as a teacher, I actually find it enhances my own meditative experience, partly because I really have to see if I'm guiding a group, because I really want compassion. I want to offer guidance that's going to be helpful in line with reality. So that actually brings a lot of presence. So as I'm guiding you, I'm guiding myself. As I'm guiding myself, I'm guiding you. So I find those experiences very powerful. Or if in a group, whether I'm listening to another teacher, there is that energy of the group that you're aware of. It's our perception, in a sense. We can't just shuffle around if we're like in our own rooms to sit down doing meditation. Sometimes you just, if you're by yourself, you just sometimes shuffle around a bit more. There's almost less what can I say? You can easily be more disturbed by the stream of thinking. It can take longer to recognize awareness, just because when we're alone, we don't have that broader sense of the field of awareness, which recognizes we're here in this space with others. So it's not just the group energy, it's also our perception of this social awareness. It actually allows our awareness to be a little bit broader in the get-go, from the get-go. Yeah, which is helpful for meditation. It can help us just not immediately react to the itch or the pain in the body, and just be aware of it a bit more, not jumping up and down because we're with others, or this, even though you're in your own room on YouTube, when you're listening to a meditation, when you're listening to a guidance, actually, this is a very powerful method for settling into awareness, is listening. So if we're listening to guidance, just notice that the quality of listening is an open field. It's a receptive field. If I ask you to listen, can you hear the sound of the birds? Notice how that listening is an open field, receptive field, without necessarily any expectations within it. We're not searching for something. We're listening to receive something. So this is already, it's putting us into this space of open awareness, open receptive awareness. That's why it can be so much easier when we're listening to a guided meditation, or whether it's recorded or we're in a live situation. So as individuals in your own meditation, if you're not listening to guidance, practice, just explore this quality of listening in your own practice. Open up to the field, to listen to the sounds around you, or even to listen to your own thoughts that arise and cease, or the emotions that appear. Just settle into listening. Venerable Jayasara has a beautiful guided meditation that she recently put on our website called Listening, Guided Meditation on Listening. I'm not sure if she's uploaded it to YouTube yet, but it's on our website under the Guided Meditations tab. Got a beautiful little bird icon with headphones. It's a beautiful meditation on listening and the qualities of listening. And one of our long-time teachers talks about listening to the sound of silence. So this can be really helpful for people in their practice. And this comes up in the Christian tradition as well, but particularly I think it was in a recent recording Jayasara did of Father Thomas Keating, if I'm not mistaken. Because there's so many recordings that go up. But listening inwardly, and when there's no sounds appearing, when there's no thoughts appearing, we can listen to the silence, which means having this open, receptive field of awareness, tuning into what's there. So the silence means there's no words, no thoughts in that moment, but there's still listening. And we can often pick up this, it's referred to as the nada sound, or the sound of silence. It doesn't abide anywhere, it doesn't have a beginning or end. It's almost like this high-pitched frequency. And that can become an aid for meditation. You can start to hear this even when there are other sounds in the field. And one of our teachers, Ajahn Sumedho, used this and taught this extensively. And it's found in ancient spiritual literature as well. Listening to the sound of silence as a meditation to connect you with the unconditioned field of awareness, the nature of mind. So actually Jenny's giving a little more information about her earlier question. Moods, fears, or emotional energy of others, even without seeming involvement. Yes, I think my response possibly spoke to that, Jenny, about picking up on moods or emotional energy of others, even though we may not even be involved with them. It's been my experience that certainly places do have a particular energy, and sometimes there can be energy connected with the history of that place, what's been going on there. And sometimes if you go to places where there's been lots of meditation, you can feel that peacefulness as well. Sometimes places where there's been massacre and trauma, sometimes those things are not just because we're aware of that, sometimes we're not aware of that. And when you look at indigenous cultures, and they've looked at, there's places that have what they call more energy that's conducive for particular ceremonies, spiritual ceremonies, some more masculine places that became places for male ceremonies, and some places more feminine for female ceremonies, often depending on the kind of environment, landscape, and the plants that grew there. So there's a lot of this sensitivity goes back a long, long way as well. But whether you pick up on that or not, that's something different. It can affect us unconsciously. We may not be fully conscious of the effect of a place on our system, or we may have that sensitivity. When spiritual teachers use the term the space of awareness, is there actually a spatial quality to it? Meaning, awareness of an object exists in the same space that it can be seen in the visual field. So within the Tibetan tradition, the space of awareness gets used within the Dzogchen tradition. I tend to like the field of awareness, the space of awareness, because it's actually, in meditation, I perceive it as a field in terms of it. In meditation, mindfulness, awareness, you become aware of what we call objects are things that are objects of awareness. I perceive a sound or a sensation, a taste, a smell, a thought. There is perception of these things, and because they're perceived to come and go, they have perceived to have a beginning and end. They have a finiteness, so they become what we get called objects of awareness. So the Buddha talked about the sense of subject-object kind of arising together. So consciousness, there is that momentary consciousness arises with the object. We call this sense consciousness or sense contact. So there's awareness of the object, right? But then it's momentary. It's momentary. So this is the experience we call sense contact, and it appears and disappears. It's momentary. But beyond the knowing of the sense object, in the meditative experience, you also experience the gaps, the spaces between appearance of objects, where it appears that nothing's happening. But this is particularly in the mind. The busyness of the mind settles down. This is perceived more clearly. And sometimes it becomes like there's just momentary appearances within the field of awareness, so-called field of awareness. Like I said, words before are very flexible. So how do we describe it? It just appears as a field within which there's momentary appearances. So what's in the gaps? We become aware of space as an element, so that we can say that space is an object. Objectless space is, as we perceive it, is an object of awareness as well. Just because of that perception. In the Tibetan, in the Dzogchen tradition, they talk about actually the experience of space and awareness as being non-dual. So where there's space, there's awareness. Where there's awareness, there's space. You ultimately can't pull them apart. This is also in the Mahamudra tradition. Within my own Pali tradition, in meditative awareness, it goes through stages where the perception of space is seen as an object of awareness, and then a boundless space, and then the perception of boundless awareness as mind turns back on itself and perceives boundless awareness as even a finer experience in the perception of boundless space, then that can be known as an object. The perception is known as an object. Of course, it's a moment, it's a cognition. But that cognition is a sense cognition, which also falls apart. And when that's seen or understood, abiding in spacious awareness without concept, without duality, because it's the concept where this sense of subject-object arises, even ever so subtly. But without the arising of such constructs, mental constructs, there's just the, what we call abiding in the nature of mind. So these are words you're never going to, you can understand the words and have a conceptual map for it, but you're never going to understand it till it is experienced fully. You're never going to grok it, fully comprehend it, I should say, till it's experienced. It's there for you to experience. It's not something that's created. It's the opposite. It's when creations, mental creations, collapse, that it's fully cognized, known, I should say, experienced. So is there an actual spatial quality to it? We call it space. So you have to get to know what is the experience of space in your own experience. So you discern what's an object in your own meditative experience and what is the space within which those objects appear. If there's no space, objects can't appear. That's one way of looking at it. So just get to know this experience until it becomes, until you understand it more through your experience internally. Would you please share guidance on interacting with loving kindness with those who are defensive and identified fully with their ego? So loving kindness would just be to allow that, to accept that, to embrace that as it is. So even if someone we're relating to appears defensive and fully identified with ego, we don't have to struggle with that or fight with that. We can know it directly as it is, with compassion and awareness. And that isn't to say I have such compassion for them because they're struggling. It's actually allowing the experience as you perceive it to be in your own heart mind, just as it is. So you're opening, the field of awareness is open. This is an experience that arises within it. Defensiveness. You perceive defensiveness in your own mind, heart. You perceive. Even if it's a suffering of another, you perceive that. We're sensitive to that. Can you allow those impressions, that sensitivity, to be within awareness as it is? That's the true loving kindness. It's allowing, embracing, non-divisive, non-separative, doesn't judge, because it's not saying you should be one way or another, or I should be one way or another, but just allowing this is how it is, and breathing with that. So practice with that, even within your own meditation, or being with difficult things, being with your own defensiveness, your own negativity, your own difficult, painful emotions, how to be kind with that, to be with it as it is, to see it within awareness, to allow the response of compassion to embrace what is. So I'll just mention that there's a set of guided meditations on our website called Embodying Awareness and Metta under the guided meditation tab. So you'll find some helpful pointers to this there, hopefully. So Diane says, and a particular answer to something has helped so much. It is so liberating and then fleeting. Why so hard to let go of the shore, the creating and recreating of me and mine? So just see, it's a conditioned activity of the mind. It's just conditioned movement of mind. So we do this, but just keep seeing that. It doesn't have to be hard. Letting go is not about keeping something. Like when we have an experience of liberation, now I want to keep it and push those other things out of awareness, right? That can happen because it's an enjoyable, lovely experience. So it's about just opening to, there's peace. Oh, and there's the mind identifying with an emotion or an idea. Can I breathe with that? So the more you get this perspective of just allowing what comes to come, but seeing it clearly, breathing with it, the letting go is the mind that's learning to just relax fixation, relax grasping. And it's, in a sense, we can say it's not really us doing it, but the more we see the nature of sense experience to come and go, and of conditioned thinking and perception, memory, to come and go, then that perspective of seeing things as they are is the perspective of non-grasping. Sometimes we just get this sense, oh, I'm grasping, now I have to let go. This is language, the use of language. But if we keep remembering that awareness is always there, awareness is always open, it's attention in a sense, again, using words to, what's that term? Split hairs. But our attention collapses into one experience. So, but awareness can recognize when that's happening. So the more we recognize that, the more there is a relaxing out of that, collapsing into attention, collapsing into particularity. Sometimes it's helpful, we can use that capacity to think things through. If we're building a cupboard or a house or doing practical things, we have to learn how to focus and think things through. But when it comes to fixating on memory and emotions and desire and aversion, it doesn't serve us very well. It often ends up in painfulness and dukkha, where it doesn't need to. So it's this unnecessary form of conditioned habitual activity that leads us into suffering again and again. We want to keep waking up to how that's happening and remembering there's always awareness here and now, which is always free of that. And when we recognize that, there is a natural letting go and relaxing and a feeling of liberation. Even as the thoughts that come and go may not be the most desirable, they're just thoughts. They're just habitual activity, programmed activity. Which are your favorite Zen masters? What are your thoughts on Bodhidharma? There's lots of Zen teachings that Jayasara has put up on the YouTube channel. There's Dogen's teachings be quite profound. Well, that sounds. They are profound, and sometimes they're hard to understand. They're so profound, and translating from Japanese poetry into English or other languages is very difficult. So a lot of it depends on the skill of the translator to convey the true meaning. There's lots of beautiful Zen teachings that are even just up on Jayasara's channel, let alone more that she may not have discovered. I like a lot of the Zen teachings because they cut through habitual conceptuality and rationalization. They're more poetic and arty and use imagery a lot, natural imagery of the natural world. And so this kind of language can help break the mind out of rational conceptualization, rational dogmatic ways of thinking, which is exactly what the Zen tradition was all about. Wanted to kind of snap out of the conceptualizing, analyzing way of contemplating Dharma and just wake up here and now to the utter simplicity and beauty of nature inside and out. So really powerful. I don't know much about Bodhidharma, so I can't comment. What are my thoughts on Bodhidharma? He's obviously very much esteemed within the Zen world. Now, the sense doors stimulate nama and rupa, that's mind and matter, or mentality and materiality, engaging consciousness to the citta. This is the Abhidharma. Yeah, so Abhidharma is in our tradition, Abhidharma is a later compilation and analysis of the Buddha's teachings. There's a lot within the language of the Abhidharma that wasn't taught that way by the Buddha. So in one sense, Abhidharma can be, this is my opinion, can be helpful. And in another sense, it can potentially be a little bit misleading. It uses words in a way that in the early suttas it wasn't used. So you'll find these teachings in the suttas, when the Buddha's teachings on dependent origination or paticca samuppada, the way that nama-rupa gives rise to sense consciousness. And sense consciousness gives rise to nama-rupa, a co-conditionality there. So you can look into that in Samyutta Nikaya, and the collected teachings, particularly on the theme of dependent origination. I would highly recommend going to the source of these original teachings, if that's something that you're interested in. So Rick continues, he says, the arising right conditions for manifestation, dependent origination, create the wholesome or unwholesome thoughts and actions. Yeah, so just talking about the conditions for wholesome or unwholesome activity, or another word for wholesome and unwholesome, that's kusala and akusala in the original Pali, is skillful and unskillful. So skillful is that which can help lead to awakening, to wisdom, clarity, calm, insight, and happiness. Akusala is the unskillful activity of body, speech, and mind that tends to lead more in the direction of suffering and more ignorance, more greed, hatred, delusion. So discerning skillful and unskillful within our own hearts, our own minds, our own activity of body, speech, and mind is helpful. It is a factor of the path. Okay. Yeah, so someone said the sound was cutting in and out. Apologies for that. We have a bit of a weak connection here, which has been promised by a local council that they're going to do something about it. So not holding my breath, but hopefully before too long the connections will get better. I hope it's improved now. Okay. What time are we? So we're close to finishing up. We'll just see what else is here. Yes, the guided meditation started at 8 a.m. our time. Someone's asked, have you already done the meditation? But you can listen in again once this live stream goes to archives on the YouTube channel. Someone says, what does my name mean and why is it your name now? So I'm Jitindriya. It's a Pali name, Buddhist Pali name. This is Jayasara's YouTube channel. We alternate giving these live meditations. So Samaneri Jayasara, Samaneri, that's the other nun, is a 10 precept nun. And Jayasara means it's like the heartwood of victory, or the essence of victory. Jaya is victory, Sara is essence or heartwood. My name, Jitindriya, is Pali. It literally means, say, one who has mastered the senses. Indriya is sense faculty. Jit is related to this root word Jaya, victory or mastery. So it translates as one who has subdued the senses or who has mastered the senses. So these Pali names are given to us when we take ordination, and they're usually have superlative meanings which we aspire to. They're not descriptive of where we're at right now, usually. There's something that we can aspire to. So I've had this experience that samsara and nirvana are two sides of the same coin. Seeking one and rejecting the other causes further division. Indeed, I no longer see this duality and accept everything. Well, that's wonderful. You don't need any more advice, Samira, if you no longer see that duality and accept everything. That's perfect. Certainly, let me say this, in samsara nirvana, particularly in the what I'm aware of within particularly the Dzogchen Mahamudra, the highest teachings within the Vajrayana tradition, there are indeed seen as two sides of the same coin, and ultimately it's the mind that discriminates that between samsara and nirvana. Samsara meaning cyclic suffering, nirvana meaning the end of suffering or coming out of suffering, nibbana, unbinding awareness, unbinding, freed awareness. These are some translations. Or nirvana also means freedom from desire, or the extinguishment of greed, hatred, and delusion. Samsara is cyclic suffering, bound by ignorance, bound to cycles of rebirth in ignorance and experience suffering. That's what samsara means. So conceptually, indeed, they are two sides of the same coin. And really, in our experience, if we get to the point of no longer seeing the difference, truly, that there are just concepts, then there's that should be the description of fully awakened mind. There's no longer duality. For most of us, we find we fall into states of suffering, and through development of wisdom, compassion, and skillfulness, wholesome living, we find our way out of that, which we call the path. And it might go like this for a while. We fall into suffering, we find our way out, fall in, come out, until the path is fully matured and there's no more falling into suffering. And then there is the realization that suffering was merely a condition of the mind that did not understand the true nature of reality. And that condition, just like the house builder, can no longer be formed or constructed, and so it doesn't go that way anymore. And the experience is one of freedom, whatever there is. So usually in the early stages, and particularly in the Theravada tradition, samsara and nirvana, whilst they can be talked of as two sides of the same coin, they're not usually. Samsara is the state of, whilst there's ignorance, spiritual ignorance functioning, or not understanding true nature of reality, samsara is the experience. Even though we may go through periods of happiness and peace, there's this not yet fully awakened. So samsara is this cyclic experience of dukkha. And nirvana is the ending of that. Is just when that stops through the full understanding, the full awakening. And yeah, it's simply that. So in the Theravada tradition, they don't usually talk about the non-duality of samsara and nirvana, or the sameness or the non-differentiation of samsara and nirvana. These terms appear more in the Dzogchen Mahamudra teachings of when that state is fully realized, that state of non-duality. We see that these concepts are that, and the mind no longer creates such divisions. So it's not that it's different within the Theravada tradition, but it doesn't get conceptualized as that. The Buddha in Theravada Pali scriptures is regularly trying to point out to people to get them to see where they're stuck and how to release the mind. So he's really quite focused on getting people to wake up in their own experience rather than just describing the experience. Because often the mind will create something, we try to create an experience that matches the description, and that is not release, that is not liberation. So looking at what obstructs liberation is the way also that we can get free. But if you get stuck on focusing on obstructions and fixating, that can perpetuate samsara because you haven't yet got the right perspective. It is my perception of, sorry, this is further to a previous question. Thank you for saying so. Your answer is very meaningful. It is my perception of defensiveness, as you say, that I can sense it as well. So yes, embracing that is the act of kindness. Thank you for the calming and uplifting transmissions, everyone. Okay, everyone's fading out. It's getting late. Great, we've actually almost got to the end. Would you please speak to the experience of fear and how to approach feelings of fear, especially when moving away from the conditioned mind? So this is the last question. So I've spoken a little bit to that in earlier responses, and I would also point you again to those meditations on our website of Embodying Awareness and Metta. But feelings of fear, the experience of fear, fear is just another emotional state. So whatever the emotional state that's appearing, we can know it as that. If attention kind of collapses into fear as being me and mine, or if we don't see fear for what it is, as a contraction in the field of awareness, then we can perpetuate it if we're heavily identified with it. So if we practice to see that fear feels like this. This is what it feels like. Can I breathe with it in this moment? Just as it is. And we see that it's another concept, thought, emotion, sense experience that has an impression on the body. But as we breathe with it, see it for what it is, it also relaxes out. So this takes practice in most cases. So I encourage you to do those meditations on the website and see fear as just another kind of mind state. Some people say that fear actually comes from an aversive mind state, in that the aversiveness is the trying to push something away. So using that sense of loving kindness as being accepting. Okay, fear is just like this. Can I give it space? Can I give it space? That's a helpful mantra for me for many years in relation to fear and powerful anger or rage that could arise at times. It's like, instead of running from it or getting anxious about it or trying to get rid of it, internally, trust your practice. Can I give it space? See what happens internally. Giving it space, the notion, the suggestion of giving something space sometimes reveals the underlying, I don't want this, the underlying push, and lets that relax. We give it space. The mind just embraces it in the field of awareness, and it shows its own true nature. It's an appearance. Ultimately, it's empty, it disappears, there's no true substance. But often the fear is connected to old conditioning, conditioned patterns that we eventually work through. And that work through means they become fully conscious, there's understanding, they're fully integrated, and they no longer trouble us. So I hope that was helpful, everybody. Glad to share space with you all this morning, and thank you all for your questions and your awareness and your time and practice. So may you all be well, may you all go well. Venerable Jayasara will be here in 2 weeks to do the next session. And keep up the practice, keep up the path, but remember, liberation is always here and now. It's not a long-term project, so you can relax. Okay, be well, everyone. Bye for now.